Hello, good morning, welcome. Lucy is lauding the weather at the moment, lovely and sunny, a good start to spring, I think. So fantastic, and lovely to see that some of you have given up the lovely weather. I'm sure you've got better things to do than sit in the garden. I know you're all very busy landlords, but it's lovely to have you on the line this morning for Property Masters Monthly webinar. As ever, I'm joined by our Chief Executive, Angus Stewart. Good morning, Angus.
Good morning, Christine.
I can see the sun streaming through your window.
I've had to close the curtains. It's too bright. It's lovely.
We mustn't complain. We really mustn't complain. Anyway, let's kick off. I mean, it's so busy at the moment. I know for everyone, lots going on in the economy and lots as ever in the private rented sector. So, let's start, Angus, with you. Your thoughts are sort of a brief overview, and just everyone on the line, if you have any questions, I can see we've already got one question there and ask a question. Do pop your questions in, ask a question, or in the chat box. I'll monitor that and put them to Angus. But okay, Angus, what have you been seeing going on at the moment in the market?
Well, I think that let's sort of start and reflect. We've had a war going on in the last month, and I was talking earlier this morning with a friend of mine who was out in Ukraine and Kiev, helping people get out of the country. And it brought it home to me that, the risks that some people are taking, the challenges that we've got in the world, the impact that this war is having on the economy for all of us is staggering. And so, while we're focused on buy-to-let in our lovely, secure UK, there are people out there who are really suffering, and I think so all of us to give some thought to what's happening elsewhere in the world. But notwithstanding that, we're here to talk about buy-to-let. This is an opportunity for you to ask questions generally about the market, any situations you might have, and I'll do my best to answer them, although some of them may need to be taken offline depending on complexity of the situation. But let's sort of kick off in terms of what's happening out there. Well, if we look at, there's some stats now out that, last year, buy-to-let lending was at its highest level ever. UK Finance has shown that there was 45.6 billion worth of business in 2021. Now, I also know there's probably another 20 billion worth of transactions which were product transfers, which don't have the visibility within UK Finance figures because they've stayed within the same organisation. So this is actually a big business. It's a big market, and this is higher than the previous peak, which was in the days of pre-credit crunch 2007. So buy-to-let lending is up, and I know I'm talking to lenders at the moment, and they're seeing continued growth, and see as a great marketplace. 2021, of course, because of the cut in stamp duty, was actually a good year for anybody to buy property. And clearly, savvy buy-to-let investors have managed to take advantage of that to a good degree. But we're now in a slightly different situation. We're in 2022. We've got inflation at its highest level for 30 years. As I said, we've got a war in Ukraine. We've got fuel costs going through the roof, exacerbated by that war. And, household bills are estimated to go up this year by about £3,000, and that is a staggering increase. And I think as landlords, we've got to watch that some of our tenants are going to be suffering and struggling, and that's means that you really need to understand some of the pressures they're going to be under. We went through COVID, and some people had problems then and challenges. We're in a situation now where there is no cover from the Chancellor in terms of telling lenders to help landlords out if their tenants aren't paying. We're in a slightly different scenario at the moment, and I think we just need to support our tenants as best we can, understand those who are under pressure, and recognise that. But I think we're going to have a tough year, or some people are going to have a tough year. So the Chancellor's trying to soften the blow. We had the spring statement a couple of days ago. He's sort of waiving an income tax cut in a couple of years' time, from 20% to 19%. Well, that might be great in advance of the next election. It's not going to help people over the next 12 months. National insurance increase, which was to help pay with costs of NHS and social care coming out of COVID, is going ahead. There is a degree of relief, certainly for the lower paid, in that we've got an increase in the threshold from 9,600 to 12,570. Homeowners who need to invest in or want to invest in their properties to actually reduce the amount of green, or to help from a green perspective, apologies. There is solar panels and other things, heat pumps, are going to be VAT registered at 0%. I'm assuming that that's going to cover landlords as well, because the easiest way that they could do this is just reduce the tax on to 0% for everybody. But we haven't heard anything different. But so I'm hoping there isn't a situation where there is something different for homeowners from landlords. There is a doubling in the current £500 million household support fund, and last but not least, fuel duty to cut by 5p. Again, that is a modicum of help, but given the very substantial rise in fuel prices over the last couple of months, I think it isn't going to make that much difference for any of us. So, a little bit given to us. I think it's probably challenging for the Chancellor to give huge amounts to us, but there are some good news. We didn't get hit as landlords in any other way. There have been things sort of talked about in the past, stamp duty for landlords moving from 3% to 4%. That wasn't in there. And so I think, to some degree, we've escaped. If you listen to what the Shadow Chancellor was saying, they would like to hit the landlords a lot more than are being hit at the moment. So, we sort of live to survive another day with some of those challenges. But anyway, so that's where we are. That's what I think of the current position in terms of the spring statement. And let's see if we've got any questions from.
It's quite interesting to see the front pages after the spring statement with a sort of universal thumbs down, even from the traditional Conservative supporting papers. So it's not really gone down that well, and it is seen as just a drop in the ocean, as it were.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, Chris. There's a bit of a tightrope there, and I am concerned that we're going to have a lot of people struggling this year. And whilst rent is probably the most important thing for these people to pay, some of them are going to have a choice between, do they buy food or do they pay their rent? And so I think we may have some landlords who have some tenants who are going to struggle over the next few months. So keep an eye on things. Obviously, keep the contact with tenants going, keep that dialogue going. So to minimise the surprises, as it were, I think is usually the advice that's given. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, interesting. We'll come back in a moment to some of the fundamentals of the market and get your view on those. But we do have a question here. It's interesting you touched on stamp duty here, because Sam is asking, I want to transfer the home I live in to my new smart company. Not quite sure, Sam, what you mean by a smart company. I'm assuming a limited company, but if there's something different, let us know. I want to do that prior to moving to a new property. Do I have to sell it with stamp duty? And how long do I have to move from the property if the new home purchase takes 3 to 6 months? So there's a couple of issues there, Angus. What's your advice to Sam?
I'm assuming, Sam, that you're living in this property at the moment as your main residential home, and that what you're thinking about doing is selling it into a limited company, a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, to become a buy-to-let. And if that's the case, there's clearly a sale and purchase involved, and that means that the limited company buying the property will need to pay stamp duty on that purchase. In terms of your position, if it's been your main residential home, then the sale should be capital gains tax free. And I didn't quite understand this sort of 3 to 6 month element that you're talking about there. I can't see why you can't move the things together. If for any reason you didn't do it through a limited company and you were just looking to remortgage it as a buy-to-let, then that becomes a consumer buy-to-let because you've lived in that property. So that becomes a regulated transaction. Again, it'd be useful to understand whether you've got a broader portfolio. Again, if you're a portfolio landlord, sometimes lenders take a slightly different view on what you're trying to do there. But what I'd suggest is that you actually get in touch with us, go to the site, and give us a bit more detail, and we can try and assist in terms of what you're trying to do.
I mean, there's a lot of commentary, and we've seen it, haven't we? We've seen so many landlords deciding to set up limited companies, and there are all sorts of tax reasons why that makes sense. For example, you're paying corporation tax rather than personal taxation and so on. But if you have existing properties, they still have to be sold into the company, and the company still pays stamp duty. That's right, isn't it, Angus?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's a purchase, it's a purchase, and stamp duty is required. I mean, there are various schemes I've heard of where you can do through a partnership into a limited company, but you've got to have a tax planner involved, and it will take 2 or 3 years to do that transaction. And I think you've then got to be very careful that HMRC don't see it as a tax avoidance approach. I think in this situation it would look to me as though stamp duty would be payable on the purchase.
But maybe you're talking about the fundamentals of the market. It might be a good time to sell. If you look at some of the figures, I mean, Rightmove the other day we're talking about annual price growth in houses of more than 10%, and that the average asking price was now £350,000. So maybe that might be encouraging people to sell their properties. What do you think, Angus? Is that going to carry on?
Well, there's clearly much greater demand for purchase of properties than there is supply at the moment, and that's why you're getting some heady asking prices. So although the typical asking price is over 350,000, the average property value in terms of what's happened in the market is about 273,000. So there is a bit of a difference there. Is it a good time to sell? Well, you pay your money and takes your choice, really. I think are we going to see this continued rate of growth in terms of house prices? Possibly not. Although, I was a bit concerned at the beginning of COVID we were going to see a bit of a hit, and I was wrong. So, crystal ball, none of us really know what's going to happen. There is an awful lot happening in the economy. Interest rates are going up. People are short of cash. You are going to see lenders more concerned about affordability because of all the changes in food prices, energy prices, and so on. So I think there'll be a sort of a constraining factor in there. In terms of how much people are willing to lend, especially in the residential market. And if that's the case, I think you're going to find that some of the rapid growth that we've seen in house prices is going to get tempered over the next few months. So I don't think we're going to have a crash, but I do think that the rate of growth is not going to get maintained.
Maybe it's almost like, the steam coming out, as it were. I mean, a lot of people were fortunate in being able to work from home and save money, and clearly some of that is finding its way into the housing market, but that will run out over time. Maybe not immediately, but over time.
Yeah, so they may have higher deposits available because they were able to save, but in the scale of things, is that going to make a huge difference, especially if we've got lenders looking at how much they can afford from their monthly budgets with energy prices and food prices and so on going up. So I think you're going to get a squeeze at that point in terms of the multiple that you can borrow in the residential space, and clearly in the buy-to-let space, that's predominantly driven by the amount of rent you can receive. And I think landlords need to be very careful. Is this a market in which you can increase rents? It might be more challenging to do that if you know that people are actually under some pressure, and you might want to make sure that you actually keep your good tenants in there and keep them happy, rather than putting additional pressure on them when cash is tight.
I mean, that's the other side of the coin, isn't it, really? I mean, the big difference between being a residential buyer and a buy-to-let buyer, a landlord, as it were, is that if you're residential, there are whole income and expenditure requirements that need to be satisfied. If it's a landlord, then the lender is looking at the rental value, and rents are looking good at the moment.
Well, you say that, Christine. There are certain situations where lenders need to look at your own personal circumstances, especially if you've got property, say in the southeast, where the rental cover is insufficient to warrant the purchase. We have something called top slicing, which is where your personal income is used to give confidence to the lender that you could afford a shortfall in rent, and in those situations, then they will look at these other elements, and again, they're going to be seeing, being a bit concerned, I would guess, that there's some tightening there. So it really does depend on the property, the amount of cover, who the lender is, lots and lots of things to consider, and that's why coming to a broker like Property Master, where we understand the complexities of that market and understand which lenders will or won't consider different elements, is in your interest.
Yeah, because lending requirement. I remember talking to one of your guys who was saying just one bank alone, it went into at least 100 pages in terms of different lending requirements. So it's incredibly complex.
The criteria can be remarkably complex, from different lenders, and varies by type of property, location, and all sorts of other things. So, and affordability is just one of those complex rules that sits within that.
Coming back to rents, though, I mean, there's been good news on the rental front if you are a landlord. But again, is that going to carry on? Are we going to see those rises given all the pressures you've just outlined there of cost of living and so on?
Well, we've seen some increases in London, but then London had a big hit during COVID. Everybody was moving out, and now we're in a situation where people hopefully are being able to move back in and starting to work again. And that being the case, we are seeing some rental increases in central London. Whether that's going to be maintainable or not, I don't know.
But in terms of where are landlords tending to invest at the moment? I mean, London's always a tricky one, isn't it? Where are the best returns to be found?
Well, I think you'll probably find from a yield perspective, the best returns are still to be found outside London. Sort of northeast, northwest are good areas. I mean, there was a bit of research done which sort of assumed that you put £50,000 down 25 years ago, and you took the rental and you reinvested it all the way through over the last 25 years, and your 50 grand in the northeast would have given you a property portfolio worth 6.3 million, and the one in London would have given you 4.7 million. Now, I wished I'd put £50,000 in property in the northeast 25 years ago. That would have been sensible, and I didn't. But it just shows that people look at the different areas of the country, and you've got to understand the difference between capital growth and yield, and some of the challenges there. So.
No, absolutely. But this has been a consistent theme for a while of landlords diversifying out of London and the southeast and moving further north. And we had some landlord guests on, didn't we, only recently, and they were beginning to move out of the areas that they had traditionally had their portfolios in, chasing the yield, as it were. There's another question here. This is something we've talked a lot about. And this is from John. Do you think there will be a change in regulations regarding energy performance certificates for rentals? Oh, this is such a hot topic, John, isn't it? And it is coming down the track. It's 3 years away until all new tenancies will require an EPC of at least a C. Is it going to happen? Is it going to be a change?
I think we're going to see some change. I think there are different questions here in terms of what is an EPC of a C. What does it really mean? And we've had some debates. A few months ago, we had an energy specialist as a guest on this webinar, and we learned that EPCs and how they work is driven by the cost of energy rather than how green they are and the amount of CO2 emissions or what you're saving. And that's fascinating, because if you rework it with some of the increased cost of energy, you're actually going to get a slightly different calculation on your EPC in a couple of months' time than you did a year ago. And I'm interested to see what the impact of the energy price increase is on the way the EPCs are calculated. And maybe that's something we should come back to Christine and talk to our expert on that. But I actually think they should change the EPC system to actually look at CO2 savings and make them much greener in terms of how they work. Now, we look at that would actually help drive, the greening of property, which I think is what the government's real goal is, as opposed to savings in energy cost. And certainly, I think savings in energy cost is certainly a misnomer at the moment with all the price increases we're seeing. So, do I see something coming in? Yes. Can some of these rules be applied to all properties? I think for some properties out there, some of the older properties, some of the Victorian properties, trying to get to an EPC of C or above is going to be a real challenge cost-wise. I'm sure it's doable. Everything's doable, but is it cost-effective to do it? And if you've got a terrace property in the northeast that's worth £60,000 and somebody's telling you to get it to an EPC of C and above is going to cost you £20,000 of heat pumps and double glazing and installation, you're not going to see a return as a landlord. And I think that's where some of the challenges I see coming in that some of those constraints are going to be not going to be cost effective. Now, we've got a little SOP from the Chancellor this week, that they're going to zero rate heat pumps and solar panels and so on that route to improving energy efficiency. That isn't going to be enough in many situations. We also have pressure being put on lenders that their book needs to be at least 50% EPC and above by, I think, 2028, if I remember rightly. That's going to be a challenge for some of those lenders. They're not going to want to take lower EPC rated properties if they're under pressure to actually demonstrate that they've got the spread on the book. And we're going to find that some of the lenders that sit behind, many of these lenders, especially the niche lenders, are funded through investment banks who actually set what the terms are for the money that they're lending and some of the criteria and constraints. And I think some of those might want to be on the green agenda and will actually put pressure on the lender outlet to say we need to lend more on green properties, and therefore EPC is their easiest way of doing this. So I think there's a lot that needs to be sorted out in terms of EPCs, what they really mean, what the objectives are for them, and how we're going to make it work in the future. And I don't think any of us really understand properly what's there and what needs to be there. I think some of us may know what needs to be there, but it's not there at the moment. And I think that evolution to actually get there is going to be quite a challenge.
I mean, even as they stand, when we had our guest on from Elmhurst Energy, he was saying that they change more frequently than you might expect. And we thought they were, I always imagined it was quite a static and you either were or you weren't a given grade, but it wasn't that straightforward at all, even now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the calculation changes based on the cost of energy, and they review it every 6 or 12 months, if I remember. And because we've seen such a rapid increase in the cost of energy, the amount of savings you can get from doing different things is going to be greater. And that might mean that something that was a D last year could be a C on the same assessment this year. An EPC certificate has got a life of 10 years. So, yeah, or 5 years. But yeah, so I do think that there's some challenge here in terms of what different certificates are going to show. And the other thing, we know there's variation between two different assessors.
Yes.
If you've done various things and I don't know, insulated walls, but it's not visible, a new assessor may not be able to confirm and therefore not tick that box, and therefore your property is seen as less efficient than it really is. So it's always worth keeping receipts and proof that you've done certain things, so that if you are being assessed, you can demonstrate how you've done that without somebody having to drill the walls just to confirm it.
Yeah, no. Thanks for the question, John. As you can see, there's still some moving parts there. Anyone else got any other questions? Do put them in Ask a Question or in the chat box. But you did mention that the lenders are attempting to green their books. I mean, we've seen a lot of green mortgages coming out. I mean, what do we actually mean by a green mortgage? And as a broker, do they look attractive for your clients?
But green mortgages tend to be available for people who've got an EPC rating on the property of C or above. And the way they reflect the benefit to the landlord is slightly better interest rates. So they are encouraging you as landlords to improve the energy efficiency of your property by dangling this carrot of slightly lower rates. So is there a benefit? Absolutely. That's the way, that's what these green mortgages are. To some lenders, they're as much just sort of keeping up with the competition, I think, as anything else. But we have seen lenders with swathes of green mortgages all the way through, and they just have this is exactly the same product with a marginally better interest rate than it would be for somebody who's on a D or below.
Mm-hmm. So it's about encouraging really landlords to buy perhaps from the outset more energy efficient properties.
Oh, well, absolutely. But again, I was talking to a lender the other day, and new properties are still being built which don't meet an EPC of C. And you would think that a new build would be required to be C or above, but apparently that isn't the case. So again, if you're purchasing new, double check what the EPC is.
Right. I did assume that would be where you would start if the property wasn't actually even built.
Christine, I think I assume the same. I've only heard it from one lender, maybe it's apocryphal, but it just
I think you might be right. Yeah, I thought it's a good advice to check. So you mentioned earlier on about taxes in terms of the spring statement. I mean, last year there were lots of rumours about capital gains tax, lots of going up, and stamp duty the same. Do you think we're out of the woods, or do you think there may well be a return to additional tax burdens for landlords?
I'm hoping that we're out of the woods for the next couple of years. I think if they were going to increase stamp duty from 3 to 4%, we would have seen it now. The budget last year or the spring statement, because they've clearly been looking at ways they could raise revenue. I think the challenge there is they've probably worked out that it won't actually raise what they think it's going to raise, and might have some other detrimental effects when they've been doing their modelling. So sometimes a tax rise on paper doesn't generate the additional income, and their goal is to drive additional tax revenues. So are we out of the woods? I hope so. I think whilst we have a Conservative government, I think we're probably a bit safer. Some of the things that are being suggested by the Shadow Chancellor cause me a little bit of concern. I think they see that landlords are a cash cow, and I don't think they are. You look at some of the numbers, you look at some of the constraints that the pressures on landlords to improve properties, do increase energy efficiency, may have tenants there who are struggling to pay rent, so you may actually end up with some losses there or voids there. I think generally, landlords are going to have a bit of a torrid time over the next couple of years. Some of the stuff that where we've been cushioned as landlords with low interest rates, some of the tax benefits that have been withdrawn haven't hit us in the same way. Whereas now, with interest rates going up, that is actually going to be more painful. And I think some of the change in those tax rules will start coming to the fore. I don't expect anything significant in the near future. Hope not. But we just need to keep our eyes open.
Because as you say, low interest rates have masked a lot of what's been done before, and it hasn't really made its way through the system perhaps as quickly as it could have done. But
with a rising interest rate environment, and I do see rates continuing to rise this year, although I'm hoping that we don't get another rise in May, which is when the next Bank of England MPC meeting is. But you see inflation running at the level it is. You can see some pressures still to increase rates during 2022, and that means that it's actually worth landlords having a look at their mortgages at the moment. If you are on an SVR, there's still some good deals out there. They're getting pulled. The whole market moves very quickly in terms of rates. But if you've got, even if you're on a fixed rate, have a look and see what the penalty is to get out. because again, it may be worth locking in on some of the deals that are around at the moment. I mean, I've seen some quite good 5-year deals, which are still worth taking if you've got some time, and you haven't got huge penalties to get out. Sometimes it's worth looking at it and taking a bit of pain now for longer term gain.
I remember talking to one of your guys the other day. He said, we've had one of the busiest weeks ever with rates being taken off the market, repriced, put back, and just keeping up with the speed of how these things were moving.
Yeah, I mean, there are significant changes in the market. Products are just disappearing, and they'll be pulled today, and tomorrow they're 0.25% higher or whatever it might be, and so huge volatility, and I can see that continuing this year as we see interest rates increase. The good news for landlords is that there's been more competition in the buy-to-let space, which has kept a lid on some of those increases. Quite how long that's going to continue in this way, there may well be some lenders who think they can take advantage of the situation and sort of take a bit of extra margin. Many of these lenders need to balance out what they're paying on savings rates vis-a-vis what they can charge on mortgages, and they need to balance the books there. So if they're not increasing the mortgage rates, it means that they're not able to give as much to the savers. So there is a balance somewhere in there.
Absolutely. Well, I'd say any questions, just put them in ask a question or in the chat box. We'll just sort of finish on maybe looking a little bit about, we've just covered taxation, a little bit about regulatory change. I mean, again, something that's been mooted for some time, changes in Section 21 and how landlords can get back with their own properties when things have either not worked out or they wish to use the properties for some other purpose. So where are we on that, Angus? Are we going to see those changes this year, do we think?
I think it's more likely than not we are going to see something happening this year. I mean, this has been put off over the last couple of years, and but there are indications with this new Michael Gove's Department of Levelling Up and Communities and so on, that they are going to take forward rules to abolish Section 21. I don't think that's going to be the end of the world for landlords. There will be some protections in there in terms of how do you evict tenants if they've not been paying their rent and so on. But I do think it's going to be slightly more onerous than sort of the free and easy way of just sort of evicting a tenant on a no-fault basis that you've got today. But I think for the portfolio landlord, the professional landlord, it shouldn't be too big an issue. For the people with 1 or 2 properties who might just want to move somebody on because they want to move back into the property, I think that might be a slightly bigger challenge. I think we'll have to see what the wording of the changes.
Yes, yeah, you can see there might well be an argument for to look at it. And you mentioned there people who rent out properties while perhaps they travel the world or whatever they want to do, move away for work and then want to suddenly go back in. I think that's very different from the professional landlord, isn't it? Maybe that's the distinction they'll look at.
Yeah,
possibly. Yeah. Oh, there's a question here actually from. So this is from Angela. Hello, Angela. Angela, I came out of buy-to-let in 2008 and I'm considering going back in. Seems a bit doom and gloom, but despite this, can we still make money? What do you think the sweet spot is in terms of key criteria on properties when to start buying? Oh, do come back, Angela, if it's right for you. What do you think, Angus?
I think the first thing, Angela, if I was buying a property now, I'd buy it through a limited company. I think there are some tax benefits for you, but I'm not a tax advisor, and I'm always couch this by saying get some advice from your accountant. But where would I look? I think it really depends whether I'm looking for capital gain or yield. There are some good opportunities in northeast, northwest, as we talked about before, where you could probably get a better yield on what you're doing. I think it does depend how much cash you've got to put in as a deposit. From a deposit perspective, you should be looking at putting in 25% at least. Otherwise, you're going to, you can get 80% LTV mortgages, but the rates are better at 75% clearly, and they get even better if you get down to 60-65%. You've obviously got some experience in the past, which is helpful. But if you've I suppose the other area I would consider, because there are still some benefits, is holiday lets. I think in some areas of the country, but you've got to make sure that you're confident you can let it out, and secondly understand some of the changing regulations in terms of how long you can use it for as opposed to rent it out, and being able to prove some of that to enable you to move from paying council tax on the property to small business rates. And there are benefits in paying small business rates, because you would generally get small business rates relief if you don't, depending on how you structure stuff. So I'd have a look at that. There are various regulations you need to consider in terms of some of the changes. There are some guidance sheets on our website which might be of interest to you if you're looking at holiday lets. There are good reasons to move towards an HMO, but my guidance to you would be, for the first one back in, don't go straight to an HMO. Depending on your situation, many lenders may consider you a first-time landlord again, and therefore be less keen to provide you with decent rates on an HMO. So again, talk to us, have a look at our site, do some searches, talk to one of my specialist broker colleagues who may be able to give you some guidance in terms of how best to move back into the market. It's not all doom and gloom, but I do think if you're going to go in, you probably want to say, I'm looking to build a few properties in my portfolio rather than being a one-man band. And I think there are some benefits if you've got a clear strategy as to how you're going to do that and where you're going to go.
That's interesting, actually, because you mentioned first-time landlord, and I sort of noted that down. I mean, so you say some lenders would see Angela as a first-time landlord, others might not. Does it vary like that?
Things always vary. Some. Yeah, I've got. There are some lenders out there. Let's say that you've owned. They like you to own a residential property. I've got lenders out there who will say, if you've ever owned a residential property, even if you don't own out, then we'll treat you as somebody who's owned residential. The majority of them will say, if you don't own residential today, we're going to treat you as a non-owner occupier, and therefore, you may find it more constraining to get a mortgage. And and the same with first, landlords. Are you already a landlord? Can you prove you're already a landlord? And in which case, it opens up more doors for you. Others might take a more relaxed view if you can demonstrate that you've been a landlord before. So it's all areas of grey is the honest answer. And sometimes this requires conversations with the lenders and the underwriters to see what we can do to get them to understand that you've got the experience, even if it doesn't look like it at the moment.
So it really is just as well we've got the artificial intelligence and the real people.
It isn't easy sometimes on these grey areas, and sometimes we'll run through the system or we'll have a look at it, and you've got something like Angela's situation here. We'll say, well, maybe if we talk to lender X, they'll recognise that she's got the experience and therefore include her within the opportunity. So we just need to look at each situation on its own merits.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. We'll draw it to a close there. Thank you very much for all your questions and for being with us. And in actual fact, Angus, you mentioned holiday lets. Our next webinar is on holiday lets. We're going to bring in a specialist lender in that sector. So if that's something that's interesting to you, then do monitor the newsletters that we send out. So we'll be sending out an invite for that in the next sort of few weeks or so. So thank you again, Angus. Thank you very much. Lovely to chat to you and to have so many people on the line. Enjoy the rest of your day. We will send out a recording and sort of a brief overview of some of the issues we've touched on. And those of you who raised a question, Sam, John, and Angela, do go onto the system and find out more, and maybe we can help you on your journey. Thank you all very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Bye.